Most people's dream is to become a billionaire. Most people never get to make that dream a reality. I did, but getting there was so hard. I ended up hating my life as a result of it. But before I go on, make sure you give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe to Storytime Animated. Also, be sure to hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any more awesome videos. Trust me, you do not want to miss out. I grew up poor. My mom abandoned me when I was just a toddler, and my dad was a terrible father. He spent more time drinking than actually raising me. The only person in my life who actually cared for me was my uncle, and he would let me come to his apartment sometimes to get away from my dad. Sometimes when my dad got really drunk, I would call my uncle and he would pick me up and take me to the park for some ice cream. If we returned and my dad was still too drunk to be around, my uncle would let me sleep at his place. I was so grateful for my uncle. He was the only good thing in my life. We developed a really good relationship to the point where he was more of my father than my actual father. My uncle was a businessman, and he taught me all the tips and tricks to earning money. He owned a car manufacturing business, and I became almost like his protege. I worked hard, earning money steadily over the years. And by the time I was 18, my uncle had appointed me as one of the managers of his company. For many more years, I helped build his brand into a $1 million company, but I felt I was being held back. Sure, I loved my uncle, but I didn't really agree with some of his ways. For starters, he always bought the highest quality materials when he could buy things for much cheaper and earn a lot more profit. I decided I needed to make my own company. So I started up my own car manufacturing company, and things boomed. I was earning millions and millions of dollars. My uncle didn't approve, though. He said I was cheating my customers, and that was wrong. But I didn't care. I was foolish and young and greedy, and I just wanted more money. Before long, my company rose to such heights that it overtook my uncle's original company. He was losing money, and I knew he needed help, but I didn't offer to lend him a hand. I regret that to this day. I ended up buying his company off him for a really low fee, and now I had 2 massive companies under my control, earning millions of dollars each year. I invested in all sorts of things, from the stock market to other businesses, and by the time I was 25, I was a billionaire. But I hated my life. I had no friends, no real family, no one who really cared for me. I had betrayed my uncle, the only person I truly loved. And now I had no one. Even worse, my father had suddenly come back to me, and he was acting all nice. It was unlike him. I knew he was only acting this way because he wanted money from me. Of course, I gave him some. I didn't want him to starve, and he was my father. I felt like I had to help him. For years, my money grew and grew, but my happiness only declined. I was always working, so I never had the chance to make friends. My uncle had moved abroad. I had no idea where he was. Life was miserable. But then I met someone. This woman, her name was Sally. She was so beautiful and kind-hearted, and I was truly in love with her. I treated her to all sorts of gifts. My father told me that she was only in it for the money, but I didn't listen to him. Who was he to speak anyway? I knew he was only in it for the money too. After our first few dates, I was in love with her. I really wanted to marry her. She told me she didn't want my money too. That made me truly believe she loved me for me. But then I discovered something that changed everything. We were at home when Sally's phone suddenly got a lot of messages. I asked who it was, and she said it was just her brother, but I had a feeling she was lying. Then she got up to leave and told me she was going to meet her brother. I ended up following her out, but I kept some distance between us so she wouldn't realize I was following her. She ended up going to the mall, and as I peeked around the corner, I spotted her with this really old man who looked very rich, and she was kissing him. I was so disgusted. As it turned out, my father was right. Sally was a gold digger, and she actually had multiple boyfriends who all happened to be very old and very rich. I immediately broke up with her, but my heart was broken. Meanwhile, I had become the youngest person to earn $1 billion. I was even in magazines and newspaper headlines. My name was everywhere. Everyone knew who I was. I hated the fame, too. I couldn't even go to the park without a bunch of people walking up to me, most of whom asked for money. Then, one day, I was staying in my third mansion when my staff told me a woman was at the door. They said she claimed to be my mother. I rushed out, and sure enough, there she was. I didn't have too many memories of her, but my dad always kept a photo of her hidden in his bedroom, and every now and then I would take a peek at it. It was the spitting image of my mother, except her hair was slightly graying and she had a few more wrinkles. I led her inside and sat her down in the living room. At first, no one spoke. I was still shocked to find my long-lost mother here in my home 20 years after she abandoned me. I didn't know what to think. I still had much anger within me because she had abandoned me, but I also felt relief. Finally, I had my mom back. "I'm so sorry, my son," she said. I was shocked to hear her say that. "It's okay," I said. "No, it isn't. I abandoned you. I was selfish and I abandoned you," she said. "How did you find me?" "I saw your picture and name on the news and I had to come immediately. I had no idea where you were, but when I saw your face, I knew I had to find you." I didn't know what to think. My mother had abandoned me, but she was back. But then I wondered why she had come back. Was she just like everyone else, in it for the money? Is that why she came back? I looked at her clothing and she didn't seem poor. But then again, anyone would seek more money if they could. And I also wondered if my picture and name had been on the news, but I hadn't been a billionaire, would my mother still have searched for me? I had no clue, but I decided to ask her something that had bothered me for a long time. "Why did you leave me?" I asked sadly. My mother took a deep breath. "I left because your father was so cruel, and I couldn't handle it anymore. I wish I could have taken you, but I felt you were better off with your uncle nearby. I didn't have enough money to support the both of us." "But," my voice cracked, "but didn't you miss me? How could you walk out on your own son?" My mother looked down and she started to cry. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. I couldn't help it. I told her I forgave her and I let her live with me. I was honestly just so glad to have my mom back. I had missed her so much. For a few months, she lived with me and things were pretty great. I found she was so kind and there were tons of habits she had that I had inherited. Like when she was concentrating, she always stuck out her tongue. I did the same thing. And when she laughed, she made a funny sound like a dolphin, just like me. It was so cool getting to know my mom, and she seemed really interested in my life too. She said she wanted to catch up on all the years she'd missed out on. But then things went downhill. Pretty soon, I learned the real reason why she was here, and it broke my heart. She had been living at my mansion for around 6 months. I was at work, but I decided to come home early so we could have dinner together. I stepped into my home, but I couldn't seem to find her anywhere. I looked around, and then I walked into my bedroom. What I saw made my jaw drop. My mother was rummaging in my cupboard, stealing my things. In her pocket, I could spot a few of my expensive watches, and she even had the nerve to take a diamond earring that had belonged to my ex-girlfriend. I cried out, and she froze, guilt plastered on her face. I realized she was the same as everyone else before her. She was only in it for the money, too. I told her she couldn't live with me anymore. I would support her, and I would send her money each month, but I didn't want anything to do with her. Was there no one in my family who truly cared for me? Not my money? Then I remembered. My uncle. He was the only one who had loved me, truly. I realized I had to find my uncle. I had to find out where he was. I didn't care about the money anymore. If I could switch out my billions of dollars for my uncle's forgiveness, I would do so in a heartbeat. I ended up hiring a private investigator to locate him. After weeks and weeks of searching, my private investigator notified me and discovered my uncle was living on a remote island in the Caribbean. I didn't hesitate. I booked the next available flight and I flew right over. When I arrived, I found him sitting at a local cafe with a coconut in hand, wearing a flower chain around his neck. He looked so relaxed. I walked up to him and I knelt by his side. He jumped at the sight of me. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "Uncle, I'm so sorry," I said. "I've learned the wrongness of my actions. Please, I know I do not deserve it, but I beg for your forgiveness. I don't care about the money. I've discovered life is meaningless without the people who care about you. Please, Uncle, I'm sorry." My uncle seemed to hesitate, But then he smiled. "Of course I forgive you, nephew." We hugged, and everything was right between us. After he showed me around the island, I fell in love with the place, and I decided to move there. I abandoned my businesses and let them fail. I had enough money to last me for the rest of my life. For now, I could just relax and embrace the simple life. After 2 years of living there, I ended up falling in love with a local girl, and we now have 3 children. They call my uncle Grandpa. I'm not a billionaire anymore, but I love my life. It seems money truly can't buy happiness.